going to declare at the outset of this segment that by even engaging in the discourse and dialectic that I am about to, that I am engaging in hypocrisy. I am a hypocrite in doing this because I am fulfilling the other end of the dialectic, which I say that people should not engage in at all. But I am allowing myself to be a hypocrite so that I can warn other people that yes, online discourse, most of it is completely worthless. That's not to say that there isn't useful discourse that goes on online, but the vast majority of it, particularly centered on Twitter, is complete rubbish and should be stepped over, not only for your mental health, but for the health of discussion itself. So I'm going to qualify this by saying that there are a few points of worthwhile discussion that you can have anywhere, but particularly online. The first being that you can connect useful political actors together and facilitate real-world political action through that. You can develop and discuss useful and practical ideas, so policy proposals, these sorts of things, you can test them. You can find news online that you wouldn't necessarily be able to get anywhere else through the mainstream. There are independent journalists that work on platforms like Twitter and like YouTube who report on things that the mainstream media want to keep away from you. So that's all good. And similarly, you can have insight into specialist subjects like history. The best content that I always find on platforms like Twitter are people going through history as long as they know their stuff. You can find some great stuff on there. And finally, something more personal to me would be discussion of art like music, films, games, poetry, literature, theatre, anything like that, because I believe that art is the expression of the soul and the way that humanity connects with the metaphysical reality that is outside of our material grasp. So there are a few things that I would say worthwhile discussions can easily be had. But the problem is that Twitter in particular, and a lot of other online platforms, but Twitter specifically, incentivizes bad communication and outrage farming for clicks in a way that completely diverts all attention from those useful forms of discourse and useful conversations that people can be having. And sadly, I have to say that it has got, in my opinion, worse since Elon Musk took over, for two reasons. One, monetization, useful as it can be, has encouraged the sprouting up of lots of outrage farming accounts that post novel rubbish for the sake of getting attention, or just outright fake news for the sake of getting attention because they can monetize it now. And also, the fact that on Twitter, right-wing Twitter in particular, all the groypers were banned or heavily censored. Since they have returned to the platform, they have made many conversations that I have seen indescribably worse through their presence. That's not me saying that their principles or ideas necessarily require censorship. That's me saying that their conduct and behavior in any conversation generally drags the entire thing down into the mud.
This is why I never check comments. I just pull the pin on the post and walk away and let that grenade detonate.
No, that's fine, but the discourse that goes on underneath them is real and,
Yes.
and does happen and does have effects. So to address the first thing, the slop that gets out. Josh has had his total slop war recently with accounts like Inevitable West, and he's been doing a very good job, because the problems with a lot of the slop that gets posted, and again, you could accuse us occasionally of posting slop. We do have the new daily channel now, but we have incredibly high quality slop, if you even want to call it that. This is the premium pig trough, okay? You can go to Twitter for your Inevitable Wests that's full of grade Z rubbish. Here, you get the triple S good stuff. All right? Do you agree with me, gentlemen?
Yeah. I mean, I second what you're saying about Twitter.
Yeah.
I think that it has gotten much worse.
I will say, and I'm addressing this because this platform and others do take a lot of the information that we get off of Twitter, and a lot of discourse on the online right centers around the platform, which is why I'm focusing on it so much. So you need to find a way to kind of make your timeline hygienic and avoid this stuff, to avoid being taken down unnecessary corridors.
Exactly, and I want to say that I have personally been attacked by a Twitter mob, like the ones that you mentioned. I actually try to put forward something to promote discourse on a topic, and no one cared to read what I was saying. Everyone was just projecting things upon me that I never said. and there were also threats. I mean, I don't mind. I think I should start doing what you're saying about the comment section, particularly when it's negative. But also, at the end of the day, it's just people who are often, let's just say, angry, and they don't want to engage with the points.
I will say as well, and this might be controversial, but I think that prior to Elon Musk's takeover and the expansion of the removal of a lot of the censorship guards that were on the platform, not that I agreed with them, certainly not that I agreed with some of the really questionable material that was freely available on the website, and also the involvement of organizations like the FBI, but the fact that it wasn't quite so easy to just say anything you want in any way that you wanted meant that the people who did post on it did have to refine their arguments much more and avoid unnecessarily baiting for outrage. So there was a bit more useful discourse. In my experience, what I saw, it has ramped up.
I do think the financial incentive encourages slop, and it also encourages coordination between the slop accounts. And unfortunately, and I admire Elon's purchase of the platform very much, he has amplified these accounts himself with just, wow, that's crazy, without needing to check it. I will step over the conversation about censorship a little bit because I don't agree with those parameters. What I will suggest with people how to use Twitter is to, usually I find the most successful and nourishing content is actually off-platform stuff. So if you're linking to other articles, you've got screenshots of statistics from credible outlets, you've got clips from longer form podcasts with people making solid points.
People's Substacks that they put a lot of work into.
This is the only stuff that I really post. I don't really get engaged in flame wars unless certain MPs decide to come for me. And the only other thing that I will credit Twitter with is the innovative nature of anon accounts who can use the system to its own advantage. I'm thinking of RFH on one end and Cunley Druckput on the other end. Both make some hilarious...
I was not expecting an RFH shout out here, but fair play.
She makes some great points.
That's your perspective.
Continue.
All right. But yeah, no, that's the sort of worthwhile discourse that I'm talking about, because the anon accounts like the ones that you're talking about, RFH excluded, do generate meaningful and interesting discourse. Even Cunley Druckput with his memeing genuinely highlights excellent research and often acts as a sort of center of mass for a lot of the genuinely great independent anonymous journalists that exist on the platform. So I'll give absolute every credit for that.
I have to say also that I'm not pro-censorship, and in a way this is something that it was inevitable to happen, and I think that Twitter with Elon is a massive experiment, and you do get a lot of bad accounts, throwing away sensationalist nonsense. A lot of the time it's the same video that they are reposting. But
months or years ago.
The problem is that Elon is constantly reposting a lot of this, and he is giving a massive boost to some bad accounts. But we also have community notes.
Yes.
Yes. No, that's absolutely fair. But for me, the absolute prime example of the slop is something that has been addressed on the Daily Channel. And I hate this, but I will bring it up. It was the wife jack meme and the frenzy of discourse that surrounded this. Now, my main problem with this is that for all of the controversy that this meme brought up, it is a horribly unfunny and mid meme. It is annoying things my wife says. Fantastic. Wow, it's so relatable. Who cares? I don't need to know that. But if you're going to spread it, why does it have to be so controversial? Because it's been around for ages. It pops up every so often, reignites the same controversy over and over again. It drags the conversation away from more interesting subjects, because for the past 2 weeks, the only thing people seem to have been talking about is this. And in doing so, I think if there are infiltrators and bad actors who operate within our spheres, doesn't that just go to show how easy it is to drag some otherwise very deep and intellectual thinkers into this kind of deluge of nonsense, worthless discourse? It shows how easily led people are as a mass, even when supposedly it is a dissident and intellectual mass.
Well, I must say, I have not experienced this phenomenon for the last 2 weeks whatsoever, because this entire discourse hasn't come up on my timeline, so it might
You're a lucky man.
Well, it might just be a function of your timeline.
No, this is on my following as well, not just going on the For You or anything.
Yeah, it's
like
not
that.
on my
It might just
following
be
either.
the people that I follow, but still, the people that I follow, I do try to actually cut it down to people who engage in worthwhile discourse. So the fact that it's still managed to find its way there anyway has been very frustrating. And also, there's also the fact that some of those people, on one side, you had the Groypers who revealed an incredibly disgusting, gross, anti-family streak where within days a lot of them were posting borderline fetish material that was,
I don't want to ask.
it was sadly being shared as screenshots on mine of people going, oh my god, can you believe they said this? Well, you're amplifying it by asking that. And then on the other side you had the simps saying, oh, it's cute and it's endearing. No, it's not. The whole point is that it's not cute, it's not fun, it's not endearing when your wife says, oh, where's that thing? Oh, I put it somewhere safe. Where is that? I don't know.
I think you do have to learn to laugh about it a little bit, because otherwise...
No, it's annoying.
No, it is annoying, but you also have to accept sexual difference, otherwise you become frustrated by it, and you become the kinds of people that can't accept
you have to accept it, but you don't start to turn it into something that you enjoy happening. Oh, it's so nice, it's so lovely when she forgets where all of my important things are. It's so nice when she takes 4 hours to get ready for something after I only took 5 minutes. Those aren't things that you enjoy, they're things that you tolerate in a relationship, right? You don't romanticize them. You acknowledge that if you want a proper, well-ordered society that's based around families, those are mundane things that are going to have to come with it, right? You don't romanticize it. I really found some of the simping on the other side quite annoying. But either way, that was the absolute prime example of slop. But then you also get, muddying the discourse even further, bad faith actors. Now, I'm not going to say everybody involved in this is a bad faith actor, and I'm not going to say that you guys have to agree with me here, but I, understandably, nobody's going to be surprised like this, have come to the conclusion, in my judgment, that James Lindsay is at this point a complete bad faith actor.
I think that's a fair
when it comes to engaging with people to his right on the political spectrum.
Yeah.
I do not think that he engages in any kind of worthwhile discourse with this anymore. What he has kind of become for a subset of people is almost like a cult leader, where, to me, what he has done is he throws out very, very complicated sounding mumbo jumbo, quoting a lot of different sources, oftentimes badly quoting them, and then you as the audience are expected to think, wow, I have no idea what he's talking about. That must mean he's smart. And this has, sadly, caught a lot of people off, and then they go, okay, well, if he's so smart and I can't understand what he's saying, I must have to continually go to him for information so that I can better understand what he means and be smarter as a result of that. And then they get snared into his kind of grasp. I know I'm making him sound very evil and nefarious, but I do think that it's kind of the behavior that he engages in, because if you listen to the actual content of what he says, for instance, in this trigonometry interview, when he's trying to explain what the woke right is, which is his big crusade for a while, most of it's nonsense, and the bits that aren't nonsense are the bits that he's cribbed from the philosophers that he's criticizing, that he says that he doesn't agree with and you shouldn't listen to. So in this, he's trying to accuse the woke right, which almost certainly he thinks I am, probably thinks you are as well. I don't know about you, Stelios, but you've been critical of him in the past as well, so he might even lump you in with that.
Well, I don't want to stop your point when you tell me I have to make some points here. So first of all, I think yesterday James Lindsay had a feud with Carl.
Again.
And I wanted at some point them to come and talk together. But it seems to me that Lindsay and his followers were rude to Carl. And I've publicly defended Carl. If you want to see my last posts, I'm defending Carl, despite the fact that I disagree with him on the theoretical, intellectual point he raises about Marxism and liberalism. So it seems to me that what happened was that Carl responded with a tweet that was in good faith to a post by Konstantin Kisin. And a lot of people started making fun out of Carl, and at some point Carl obviously started reacting to it and it's understandable, but he didn't start it. And I get people telling me, well, you need to be intellectually honest. Well, just look what Carl said and how people reacted to him, and look at the time on Twitter. Now, when it comes to this, it seems to me that we have two tribalisms. And in a way, they are reinforcing each other. And essentially, this is precisely what I try to stop by making a semantic post, and by saying we need to essentially think about this concept in this way and just diffuse the debate, diffuse the situation. And a lot of people that was not from Lindsay's side really dogpiled on me. So I have to, and people from the James Lindsay side did back me up on that issue. So they had my back. A lot of people from another side, they didn't, maybe because they stayed silent, or because they let's say participated into the attack on my post, which was exactly what you described in the beginning. It was someone making the discourse, trying to put forward something in discourse, and getting dogpiled by lots of people, some of whom are essentially some of the main crusaders of anti-slop.
Well, that's my point from the beginning of this.
What I want to say here is that yesterday the attack on Carl was rude, immoral, and counterproductive, and that was wrong. So,
on your point of the anti-slop thing, that's why I described myself as a hypocrite at the beginning of this, right? Because the dialectic is slop versus anti-slop. There is a point where going anti-slop becomes its own form of slop if you keep going on about it. So I'm just trying to address it all here, and then I will try to avoid talking about it as much in the future.
What Lindsay tries to do, not exactly with the woke right and kissing, and my concept of it is not theirs. I have explicitly said so. It's attitudinal, and a lot of the people who dogpiled on Carl yesterday, they act like the woke.
That's actually what Lindsay says, though. That is.
What do you mean?
Have you watched the interview?
I haven't watched that.
Okay,
it's just about the behavior.
Yeah, no, he added to the prefix woke.
I have my independent views. People can go find them.
But I don't want to start an argument, but to disagree with you. Given that woke to me, I think is best summed up by Tucker Carlson's gay race communism, I don't see it as being useful to attribute the term to a set of behavioural standards, more a set of actual beliefs about society, how it functions.
I have specifically said if you focus on the beliefs, it makes zero sense.
Yeah.
Check my post rather than just becoming a screeching Karen, okay, acting masculine, hiding behind layers of anonymity. Right.
Either way, to address this, I'm not going to go through the clip.
And also, just let me say, the attack of kissing on you was wrong.
Oh, that was fine. That was a little bit of fun.
Well, yeah. Okay.
Either way, this shows the poverty of James Lindsay's thought right here, because immediately in this clip, the first thing he does when Konstantin Kissin asks him, what does it mean? He says, well, it's a really broad, vague, and poor term. Okay? Why are you using it then? Well, it's because he is engaging in othering, he's engaging in tribalism. He lists a load of philosophers that he doesn't like and lumps them all together. So he lists Carl Schmitt, Julius Evola, and James Burnham. He clearly hasn't read them, because if he had read them, he would understand that Carl Schmitt's idea of friend-enemy, which he constantly goes on about, is not him prescribing that as the operating mode of politics. He's describing it as being the natural operating mode of politics, and James Lindsay himself is engaging in it in this clip and through use of the term. He knows that people hear woke and they think bad, so he's sticking it onto people to the right of him he doesn't like, so they think they're bad as well. It's that simple. Schmitt and Evola don't have much overlap there. I've read Evola. I really don't like him, actually. I know that some in our spheres do really like him as some kind of Italian mystic. I find his thought to be convoluted at best. Also, Burnham, excellent political theory, neocon. Neocon who actually did a lot to damage American culture through his work in the 1950s through the Congress for Cultural Freedom. That's another discussion here, but he calls Tucker Carlson woke right. again, he's got disagreements with him, so he's just throwing the label out to try and stick it on people. And then he explains what he calls the woke right narrative of politics since the end of World War II.
Which sounds a lot like my articles on the subject, which I've actually spoken to Constantine in private about, so I do wonder if James has read them.
Yeah, but he basically says, there was the post-war consensus following the end of the war, which has an operating principle of never again, both in terms of a war on such a grand global scale, also on the persecution of the Jews. That erects a cordon sanitaire around it and has the expulsion of right-wing non-interventionists from US politics as conducted by Bill Buckley. But the thing is, when he describes that, he tries to make it sound like it's some nonsense rubbish that's thrown out there. That's true, well documented, and Bill Buckley and others like him from the National Review.
Frank Meyer, specifically.
Frank Meyer.
He's a former liberal who said that the right is too hostile to liberals and libertarians, therefore we must sort of disavow the Barry Goldwater types, the Pat Buchanan types, and focus more on fusionism. And this was documented by Yoram Hazony, by the way, who I know James doesn't like, but he himself is Jewish. And when James says one of the defining characteristics of the woke right is to blame everything on Jews, you're going to have to tell the guy who says the post-war consensus and fusionism exist, who is a practicing an observant Jew, that he's blaming everything on the Jews.
Well, interestingly, when he got into this discussion and disagreement with Dave Smith on Twitter as well, Dave Smith, who I actually really like his show Part of the Problem, it's very good, he was disagreeing with him, I think it was on the Israel-Palestine conflict, because Dave is a very, very principled anti-war guy.
Right.
So because of the fact that he wasn't all in on support for Israel's action in Gaza, James Lindsay responded to him saying, well, I know you're Jew-ish. And Dave Smith is Jewish and was like, what the hell do you mean? Do you think I'm like some kind of self-hating Jew or something? Because he's I think Dave Smith's also like a converted Catholic.
Yeah, James Lindsay isn't Jewish. So
no,
why does he consider himself an authority on policing the bounds of what is and isn't Jewish?
It was very strange behavior.
On this, what I think he's saying is that if you take the woke, you see that they have several traits, and they have the tendency of finding one group and blaming everything on that group. And he says the same way that leftists are doing it for white straight males, a lot of people on the right are doing it for Jewish people. But
Tucker Carlson isn't doing that though.
But what is the issue with this overexpansion is that sometimes you become the very problem you try to combat. Because if you try to constantly say you're advocating liberty and you're defending liberalism, because that's what he says, you have to also practice what you preach. You can't just constantly avoid entering the discussion, constantly name calling people. And we all know that whenever we have several taboo terms, it's very easy for people to do and demonize. So for instance, it is a fact that some people are too trigger happy to say that criticizing, for instance, Israeli foreign policy is anti-Semitism. Yeah. If there is a sort of tribalistic approach towards the concept of the woke right, some legitimate criticisms could be seen as anti-Semitic or woke right or
that seems to have been what he was throwing at Dave Smith, because there is a big difference.
Yeah, but this is a scare. That's an alarmism that is excessive vigilance. Well, excessive vigilance can be as bad as no vigilance at all.
There you go. Whatever utility the term has, and I don't think it has any personally, he has expanded it to the point where he's accusing people of, like Dave Smith, basically calling them anti-Semitic.
He also calls them woke fascists, and so if he was to lump Dave Smith in there, who is an anarcho-capitalist libertarian who believes the state itself is immoral, and Oren McIntyre, who is not a Catholic as well, despite Lindsay accusing him of
trying to summon an angel. Yeah.
So no, summon a Zoroastrian demon in the guise of something.
That was it.
Makes much more sense. Mm-hmm. Like none of these people hold any of the beliefs that he would ascribe to fascism if he had read fascism proper. So he is engaging in what Eric Kaufman would call fascist scare, which is indistinguishable from the left-wing scare tactics that the woke actually use. So
I mean, if he wanted to understand more about what fascism actually is, he would be well served to go to the Jewish author Paul Gottfried's 2 studies on it, Fascism and Anti-Fascism. But he wouldn't do that because he's already branded Paul Gottfried as woke.
What?
Yes.
Oh, I'm just confused.
I know. By the way, going back to the original point on the whole neocon thing, again, people like Bill Buckley worked alongside James Burnham, ironically enough, to start National Review, kicked out the John Birch Society from the right wing of US politics for being too extreme, by which he meant, like free market, non-interventionists, let's not get involved in foreign wars. And then later on in the 90s, kicked out other people of a similar bent like Pat Buchanan by accusing him of being an anti-Semite.
Well, also, sorry, but on the post-war consensus thing, Rusty Reno has a great book on this. He's an editor of First Things. It's called Return the Strong Gods. I believe you and Dan spoke about it before. Theodore Adorno, a member of the Frankfurt School, worked in American universities to develop the concept of an authoritarian personality that fed into denazification, and he said that anything as innocuous as the nuclear family was itself leading ineluctably to fascism. James has, for the last 6 years, talked about how the Frankfurt School were responsible for woke. So if the Frankfurt School had an influence on American culture, leading to the woke cultural revolution which parasitized the liberalism of the post-war era, how is James Lindsay not pointing to the post-war consensus leading to woke in that?
Because the post-war consensus, and I'm not disagreeing with you, the post-war consensus is a very abstract notion.
Not really.
When people are blaming it without specifying exactly which part, because there are many consensuses.
But the people that he's categorizing...
There isn't just one.
The people he's categorizing as woke right are pointing to specific parts. For example, me, when he's dismissed as Carl Schmittian before, I've written multiple articles on how the legacy of the post-war consensus, as set up by Winston Churchill, because he's often criticized as the architect of the post-war consensus, Winston Churchill would not have agreed with the extension of the ECHR and the UN Refugee Convention to, let's say, all the anti-Semitic mobs that are chanting Free Palestine when it was originally conceived of to protect Jews that had been expelled from Europe back to Nazi Germany. That is the post-war consensus and its institutions being set up for one purpose and exhausting its purpose in another fashion. That's a very specific charge. But then he says, but the post-war consensus doesn't exist, and it's just a catch-all. I'm pointing to specific examples there, and he would dismiss that as woke right.
Yeah, and what I want to say, and without wanting to take much time of Harry's segment, is just one thing. We have debated many times liberalism and all sorts of stuff. I've debated also Carl, Dan. We have had really good and high quality conversations. Sometimes they were a bit heated, but you'd expect that. But none of them disintegrated into what happened yesterday.
Just name calling.
Yeah.
Just name calling. And I will say this, because I'm consistent and because my attitude, I am focusing on attitude, this kind of just name calling does seem pretty woke, just constantly not engaging into stuff.
Well, people have pointed out that if James Lindsay says that it is a purely behavioural attitude, then he does engage in it through this kind of behaviour. Either way, for my example of the post-war consensus, just examine the cordon sanitaire and the fact that we had a perfect example of it earlier this year in France, where the National Front Party was about to seemingly win the election, and the liberals aligned with the communists to keep them out, because anything to the right of Mao is Hitler equals the Holocaust 2.0. That is, to me, what the whole post-war consensus seems to be focused on, is preventing any step to the right that could be seen as a snowball effect to get Hitler to. Either way, moving on, in support of this, he wanted to prove how woke we all are by getting the Communist Manifesto published in a Christian nationalist publication. So this was published in American Reformer, and I'm sure they do good work. I've never heard of them before.
Nope.
Many people hadn't heard of them before, so for being a flagship publication, I think that's kind of not qualifying it for them. But he says in the article that he links here, to put the conclusion out before I explain myself, I figured a good way to test the woke right for wokeness would be to submit a little hoax essay to what I presume is their flagship publication, American Reformer. To produce this woke right hoax, I took a couple thousand words straight out of the Manifesto of the Communist Party by Marx and Engels and lightly modified it into a woke right critique of liberalism, which the so-called woke right hate. They published it, The Liberal Consensus and the New Christian Right, which you can find here. And you'll see that they've added a little editor's note here where they explain exactly why they published it and their response to this. So first of all, James, that was incredibly Reddit. 2, let's see what they had to say. Editor's note, the following article was written by James Lindsay, who, as an avowed atheist, he's written 2 books on why believing in God is stupid, by the way, which is why he gets invited to Christian speaking tours, is not eligible for publication in American Reformer. However, Mr. Lindsay originally submitted this article under the name Marcus Carlson, which was supposed to be very clever. Karl Marx, Marcus
It is kind
Carlson.
of funny.
Either way, Lindsay used a passage of Karl Marx's Communist Manifesto, stripping out its ideological substance but retaining its powerful rhetorical structure. This was intended as a hoax, but is seemingly poorly conceived, given the undeniable power of Marx's rhetorical approach, as Lindsay himself acknowledged. Everybody, critics of Marx or not, knows that, the Communist Manifesto, really great piece of rhetoric.
It's an effective piece of writing, whether you like it or not, which we all don't.
But also it's a pamphlet. And I want to say this about right-wing critics of Marxism. You can't base your knowledge of Marxism on the manifesto.
No, you need to read much deeper than that.
And also Peterson sometimes gives me the impression in his debate with Zizek, he was constantly talking about the manifesto.
I think he's read more than just that, but
more is required.
He should have consulted Zizek's work at the time. But
more is required.
But it carries on. While we were unaware of its authorship and motive, it's still a reasonable aggregate of some new right ideas repackaged with the effect of rhetoric, and we have corrected its authorship properly to credit him. We have published hundreds of new and less established writers over the last 3 years, and our readership has grown exponentially with a lean editorial staff. Got to say congratulations to you guys. Lindsay's exploitation of our high trust approach demands that we adopt a more restrictive screening process going forward.
That's disappointing.
Congratulations, James. You might have actually prevented some aspiring writers from getting published in a decent publication right there.
Well, basically, you exploited the good faith nature of Christians who themselves, like I try to, exalt truth as a principle that isn't just instrumental. I'm not shocked that an atheist would think lying doesn't actually carry any moral consequences.
But also, again, this is just another reheating of the hoax that made him famous in the first place. Except this time, you know how the most famous one, I think, was that he changed out some words from Mein Kampf and just replaced the word Jew with white man. And that was about all the editing he did, and it got published in some woke journal.
Feminist journal, specifically.
Yeah, feminist journal. Well, guess what? It wasn't just as simple as changing a word here or there. If I scroll down here, as you'll see, he basically rewrote the whole thing.
The stuff in red is what he's rewritten. Wow.
So, yeah, can you even say that he just changed it? Oh, they published
what he reframed.
Yeah, they published the Communist Manifesto, except you changed most of the words, you changed all of the context, which changes the complete meaning of it, which again means that what you're not writing is the Communist Manifesto, you're writing something completely different, with a completely different intention and metaphysic behind it, except you're just using similar rhetoric.
But something to note, for instance, I think that this isn't the case for the first sentence. It says, a rising spirit is haunting America, the spirit of a true Christian right. That's a red line, but it doesn't seem to change fundamentally the meaning.
Yeah,
but I appreciate what you're saying.
If I was an editor looking at this from somebody who'd submitted it, I'd gone, oh, that's a nice homage.
Yeah.
It's clearly, you would just think, being as Connor pointed out, that you're a bit high trust here, that what you're looking at is somebody who's chosen to write these ideas in a proven, effective rhetorical style.
Also, spirit and spectre are completely different words, and spirit has a specific meaning in the Christian context. And, yeah, sure, it's similar sentence structure, but actually changing the words changes the entire meaning. Because, for example, if we were to say the 1965 Civil Rights Act was discriminating against white men, then James Lindsay would call us woke right, even though it's true. If we changed the word white to black, it wouldn't make any bloody sense. So it turns out words actually have meaning and completely change the context with which you are speaking.
That's a shock. But Carl, as you mentioned, got into a bit of a tiff with him, but I think this was the most important part to show again how poor James Lindsay's own rhetoric and his own thought is on these subjects, where James said, the fact is the fact, a leading publication on the so-called woke right published the exact same logical structure in much of the same language as Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto when it favoured their conclusions. So Carl points out, it's bizarre, the logical structure of an argument is rarely unique to that argument. If Marxists say capitalism is oppressing the proletariat, we ought to overthrow capitalism, that follows the logical structure of immigration is destroying America, we ought to end immigration, doesn't mean that they're both communist arguments.
I want to say something because people completely neglect overlaps. in this case. So, for instance, one of the criticisms that I had people saying was Karl doesn't distinguish between conservatism and Marxism. No, he does. It's just that in his mind, they overlap in some cases. Doesn't make him a Marxist. Also, to a level of abstraction, you could say that this characterizes all politics. All politics disintegrates into groups with different interests battling each other. So,
fighting for power, yes.
Exactly. So once you abstract some elements, there's a common story there. Just by showing the common story, you don't say that much. But I have to be also fair to this. It's just I haven't read the piece. At some point I'll read it. I want to see what's going on.
Either way, so my point in all of this is that there is a lot of worthless chatter that goes on online, and there are also a lot of bad faith actors who will use rhetorical tricks and magical thinking to try to lead you down dead-end alleyways. Okay? So what you need to do if you're going to engage with it online is to make sure to be prepared and make sure that you are effectively set up to sort the wheat from the chaff, because sadly the ratio there is about 20-80.
I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, you can always watch us have fun in Lads Hour, where we sort of are a bit laid back, have a bit of fun, and if you want to see all the other things that we're up to, you can always follow us on Twitter. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.